A 3,500-pound car traveling at 40 miles per hour into a massive block of steel and concrete. A $250,000 crash test dummy, over 30 high-tech sensors, and a team of dedicated professionals. This is just some of what it takes to keep you safe in your car. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety Test Facility crashes around 80 cars a year, meticulously, deliberately, and scientifically. It is precise and serious work, and it saves lives. Today we're seeing a new test. It is the Small Overlap Frontal Crash Test, specifically designed to protect drivers from the dangers of a common and deadly accident. What does it take to recreate such devastating car accidents? How is the information recorded and analyzed? And how does it make your car safer? We're going to show you on this episode of Popular Mechanics how they do that. Ruckersville, Virginia, home of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety's crash test facility. Here in a 22,000 square foot test hall, cars are subjected to frightening but all too real collisions. What they find ultimately makes for safer cars.
The Insurance Institutes are nonprofit organizations involved in doing research on highway safety problems and the solutions to those problems. We are wholly funded by auto insurers. We have been leaders in doing highway safety research on all aspects of the problem, the vehicles, the roads, the people, and looking for solutions to the problems that occur out there. But here at the Vehicle Research Center, we focus on the vehicle. One of the biggest products of the Vehicle Research Center are our crash test ratings. We started in 1995 with frontal crash tests. We have done a study that shows that the likelihood that you're going to die in a crash rated good by us is 35% lower than in a car we rated poor. The difference in death rates for our side impact ratings is a 70% lower probability that you will die in a side impact crash if you're riding in a good rated vehicle versus one that we've rated poor. As manufacturers change the vehicle designs to achieve higher ratings in our tests, we are putting safer vehicles out on the road. So we're going to be seeing a small overlap crash test, and it's the latest in our evolution of crash test ratings.
So the test we're running tomorrow is part of a series of comparative evaluations of what we call mid-size, moderately priced cars. And so we're testing all of those vehicles in the US market to compare their performance in this new test, and then share these results to the public with the hope that that will spur their purchasing decisions so that they may choose a vehicle that has a somewhat safer design, and then that in turn will pressure the automakers to make better designs in their products.
Crashing into a flat wall didn't represent the wide range of crashes that were occurring out in the real world. We find that there are a large number of these what we call small overlap crashes.
It replicates the kind of impacts like you might have if you run off the road and hit the edge of your car into a tree, or when somebody crosses the center line and they clip each other on the driver's side by about 20 or 30% of the car's width.
The small overlap crash test is a front crash that almost didn't happen, but unfortunately does, and only involves a little bit of the structure at the front of the car.
Today, the 2013 Nissan Altima is being put to the test. It has taken days to prepare the car, installing testing systems, taking exact measurements, and mounting the digital imagers. And in less than 16 seconds, it will all be over. The countdown begins.
G-forwards are now armed.
Charging is now complete. Test will commence in 4 seconds.
Now let's analyze the crash second by second. The Altima is chained to a sled 538 feet down the runway. The countdown ends, and a specially built hydraulic motor engages and pulls the sled and the car with the force of 0.225 Gs. The car rapidly gains speed. At 10.7 seconds, high-speed film cameras are activated to record the event. At 12.1 seconds and a distance of 355.83 feet, the vehicle hits the required constant speed of 40 miles per hour. It will maintain that speed until impact. At 15.2 seconds, the car slams into the small overlap barrier with a force of up to 40 Gs. The crash test dummy strikes the frontal airbag in 78 milliseconds. And 1.2 seconds after the impact, the car comes to a halt. Now it's time to examine the results.
One of the most important factors that we have here is that these tests have to be consistent. They have to be repeatable. We have a series of checklists. We have a series of gauges and monitors throughout this whole area so that we can make sure each test is exactly the same.
There has been crash testing as long as there have been motor cars. In the early days, engineers and researchers were looking at kind of the same things that we're looking at today. How well does the vehicle structure hold up when it crashes? What happens to the people inside those crashes?
So many crazy different ways that people have used to make crash tests happen. It's like engineers gone wild.
Moving the vehicles for a crash test has evolved from tying a rope to one vehicle and pulling it with another one and then letting it go to what we have here today. But of course, crash testing really didn't get a lot of attention until the 60s and 70s, when the predecessor to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration was established by Congress.
When the vehicle arrives, it goes through a check-in procedure to check for defects. Vehicle preparation includes all of the test setup, data acquisition systems, cameras, lighting systems, that sort of thing. Pre-crash measurements are taken and then compared with post-crash measurements. The vehicle is prepared with signage. The front driver's side tire is painted white in order to contrast the black tire with the black wheel well during video analysis.
We want to maintain the vehicle at close to its normal weight, only adding what we put in as electronics. When we drain fluids, we want to remove gasoline. We don't want fires or explosions. In the place of gasoline, we use cleaning fluid. This makes it safe, and we can still tell if there's a fluid leak. We drain the batteries, because once again, we don't want acid all over the place. So we add our own systems to the back of the car. Normally those go in the trunk. And they're 12-volt systems, and they supply power to the vehicle. The dummy needs power for all the accelerometers and things.
The sensors in the car are measuring vehicle accelerations as it hits the barrier. There will be 30 plus sensors in the dummy and 4 in the car. On the outside of the trunk here, we have our router, which is used for downloading the data after the test. All that data is post-processed on the computer, and then we analyze it later after the test.
We do a lot of measurements so that we know what the vehicle looks like before the crash, and we can compare those measurements with what happens afterwards. And of course, we get the dummy ready for the crash test.
At least the positioning part of things, there's very specific guidelines. Our protocols followed to the T to ensure that it's repeatable. The procedure we use, UMPTRE, developed at the University of Michigan, is very, very repeatable. Procedure calls for you to collapse the dummy over, rock it side to side, pushing back on the knees, force pelvis and drive pelvis into the seat. That's like somebody getting in the car and rocking back and forth and getting adjusted. Very specific guidelines on how to pick the leg up, lower it back down until it naturally falls, putting the heel down, then pointing the toe. Natural things, but followed in the exact order, they just end up in the same spot over and over and over again. These dummies have to stay inside strict temperature and humidity guidelines to develop a baseline for the way this tissue, how it reacts with everything. It gets too hot, it's too tacky, and sticks to things. Too cold, it's brittle and hard. All these things are just to be more of a natural or realistic feel, the way your body would interact with parts of the vehicle, plastics and fabrics and such. And very shortly, we get it back to the shed, where it is also temperature controlled to sit overnight for 12 hours.
The early days of crash testing, the crash test dummies were much less sophisticated than the dummies we have today. They had metal bones and rubber skin. You could basically watch where they moved when a car crashed and guess what that might mean with respect to injuries. Today's dummies are much more sophisticated. One of the big innovations in crash dummy development was the standardization of the crash test dummies. That sort of started with the Hybrid 2 dummies. Now we're using the Hybrid 3 family of dummies, and as dummies evolve, they are becoming better and better representations of the human structure.
We have dummies for frontal impact testing, side impact testing, and rear impact testing. And we also have child dummies for child restraints as well. A dummy is made to be repairable, an infinite lifespan because everything's interchangeable. The bones are made of steel, and then it's a dense foam covered in latex.
The dummies in the crash test today are equipped with dozens of sensors, and each of those sensors is measuring force or stress or strain or displacement of the parts to which it's attached. Our crash test dummies today are equipped with a data recorder that is about the size of a cigarette pack and fits inside the dummy. All of the sensors throughout the body have little wires that go to this cigarette pack and collect all the data that we care about during the crash.
Just the bare bones, no instrumentation, $40,000 to $50,000. Once you're fully instrumented, approaching $250,000.
Crash hall itself is 22,000 square feet. We have 3 runways that come into the crash hall. They're each 600 feet long. This allows us to crash from different directions. We can do vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. We can do bumper testing. Everything can happen within this area. The reason these runways are 600 feet is because of the machinery we use to bring the car up to speed. We need that distance to bring the car up to whatever the test speed is and then hold at that speed for a certain amount of time. The main feature in the crash hall, of course, is our barrier here. It weighs 326,000 pounds. It's made of concrete and steel. We can actually move this around in the facility within a certain area using a set of air casters. On front of this barrier here is our small offset barrier. We have these concrete blocks that you see around. These are 3,400 pounds apiece, and they're hooked together. In the center, they're actually jointed, so they make like a chain. And if the car should spin off, we can contain it within this area. We have the lighting system up here, which is strictly for the cameras. We'll be using almost all of these in the crash tomorrow. We have cameras, as you see, in the ceilings. We'll have more cameras set up on the floor. We'll have cameras on this side here. So we'll be seeing the vehicle from all angles. We will also have cameras inside the vehicle taping as this crash takes place.
Vehicle safety, that is, the vehicle's ability to protect you in a crash, has improved immensely over 50 years. One example would be our crash test of the 1959 Chevrolet Bel Air into a Chevrolet Malibu. What you see there is a vehicle that a lot of people would have assumed was safe because it was bigger and heavier, in fact falls apart when it runs up against its newer offspring. That's a result of there actually having been safety standards requiring vehicles since 1959 to be designed to protect people, which wasn't the case 50 years ago.
We call this thing a skate. It rides in the floor and is attached to the cables that loop around in the basement.
And this skate is about 300 pounds, and we'll be pulling the car along at about 40 miles an hour.
The skate rides in a trough on the floor, and it's got rollers to keep it moving smoothly. There's a hook on the front that we attach to chains that we've attached to the front of the vehicle. The hook slides over the chain, and when the hook is moving, it pulls the chain, it pulls the car. But to keep the car perfectly stationary, we also attach it to the rear of the skate. We now have the car captive. We've got it with a hook in the front and then a ratchet strap in the rear so that the car can't move forward or aft relative to the skate. And then the skate is precisely controlled by our crash machine. Just before impact, we let go of the rear attachment and we stop the skate very abruptly. And when that stops, the car is able to just move forward without the skate having any influence on the crash.
We do not want to pull it into the barrier and do any additional damage that wouldn't happen in a real-life crash.
It takes a massive amount of power to hurl these 2-ton cars down the runway. You need a big engine with lots of torque.
Well, you're looking at our crash machine. It works with compressed nitrogen pushing on hydraulic oil to spin motors that then pull the car down the crash in. The nuts and bolts are in these blue tanks right behind us. There's 18 tanks that have nitrogen in them. That nitrogen's also sitting on top of accumulators that have pistons in them. The pistons are currently at the bottom of the accumulator. And so what we're going to do before the crash is we're going to fire up a hydraulic pump, fill these accumulators with oil, and when they fill, they're compressing that nitrogen back into these 18 tanks, and that's going to get up to about 5,000 psi. When we're done filling, we now have a lot of hydraulic oil sitting under very high pressure, and that's the energy source for the crashes. So that oil then flows through these large pipes to radial piston hydraulic motors, and those motors spin almost like an old-fashioned aircraft with the pistons all around a center shaft, but it all runs on hydraulic oil. So the heart of the crash machine are these 3 radial piston motors. Each one has 6 pistons surrounding a central shaft, spins the cable, a big sheave, and in that sheave is a 5/8 diameter wire rope cable. That cable then gets threaded all the way down, almost 1,000 feet in total length, and the car gets attached to that cable and gets pulled in upstairs to the crash. Currently, all of our consumer information tests are run somewhere between 30 and 40 miles an hour. We've run a 100-mile-an-hour closing speed crash just to prove out the system in the past, and I can tell you, in an enclosed facility, that's a scary crash.
Not everybody gets to crash cars every day, and we all kind of get a kick out of that. The interesting thing is when we find big differences, and occasionally the tests don't turn out the way we expect them, and that's something that we as engineers all get a lot of charge out of, because it's a new problem for us to solve. Nearly all of the vehicles that we test here at the Vehicle Research Center come from auto dealerships around Central Virginia. Our main objective here is buying actual vehicles that people will buy and drive.
We usually do 2 tests a week. The reason for that is it takes so long to set one up. Could take 2 to 3 days to prep a vehicle from start to finish here. Depending on what type of crashes we're doing, I'd say we average about 80 crashes a year. Once the crash is all set up, control of the crash turns over to the tower. Up here we monitor the crash, we can end the crash if we needed to. Once I start this, we have 4 minutes and 30 seconds to get everything else in line. Open the doors, turn on the lights, make sure everything's correct and ready to happen. This is the start button here. This is what actually starts the crash. The car will come down the runway and impact the barrier down there on the floor. I'll be able to see the voltage on the automobile. I'll be able to see the brake line pressure there to make sure we've got brakes. On this screen here, we select our runway, we input what the car is, how much the car weighs, the speed we want from the vehicle. The machine in turn tells us how long it's going to take to achieve that. Right now, we got 12.1 seconds to get up to 40 miles an hour, and it's going to take 3.3 seconds of constant time, or at 40 miles an hour, before it impacts that barrier. This tells us the distance of the car. She is sitting back there right now, tied down to the skate, and the skate is sitting at 164 meters. We control the acceleration of the crash by inputting how many G's it can accelerate. And the reason we do that is the machine is capable of pulling it so quickly that it will unhook from the skate. This is also where we set the camera timing. The cameras will come on once the triggers hit at 4,500 milliseconds. Here I control the lights, and at 30 seconds I'll be turning all the house lights off, and I'll be turning all these lights on. I have a set of cameras here on every runway. This allows me to make sure there's nobody back there, to make sure the doors are open. This is our lockout, and I lock out any doors coming into the room and all the garage doors. That way no one can enter during a crash. You know, we don't want them walking through here.
On the morning of the crash test, all this comes together, and we attach the vehicle to the crash machine.
We paint the dummy, it's a grease paint. We want to see paint transfer We use different colors for different parts of the body so that we can tell this side of the head hit here, the inboard side of the head hit rolled off, paint the skull cap for any rebound as it's coming back into the seat.
And then after all of our checks that the data systems and the dummy positioning and all that stuff is in place, we're ready for the crash test. And the crash machine will pull the vehicle into the block for the crash test. During that time, we'll be filming it in high speed so that we can slow down the viewing and see in slow motion something that takes place in just a fraction of a second. So after the crash, we'll take all that information from the cameras and from the data recorders and figure out what that means for a person that might be in the same place as the crash test dummy.
Immediately after the crash, I'll come down and take a look for any head contacts or any dummy contacts that I can see immediately after the crash. This helps us to identify early whether the head may have hit the A-pillar or the roof rail or any knee contacts that would be visible immediately after the crash. And then we bring the vehicle into our photo studio where we take more exterior photos. Following those exterior photos, we'll remove the door, take some more photos while the dummy's inside the door, and then we begin our comprehensive interior investigation. We see our pretty characteristic red, blue, and pink from the dummy head on the side curtain, and also pink and blue from the dummy's face contacting the frontal airbag. We'll notice some of the intrusion from the car striking the barrier, and then also in the footwell, we have painted our left shin red, and we can see some red paint on the left instrument panel, and then also even further in, there's green and pink from the right leg on the right knee bolster. Following my interior investigation, we're going to take out the dummy. Tyler will clean him up. Let me know if there's any skin lacerations or any other dummy damage that we need to address in the future. Our photography department will come in and take some additional photos. The rest of the vehicle equipment is being removed at this time. The car itself will then get its post-crash intrusion measurements taken, and following all of our measurements and investigations, this car will eventually go to salvage. One of the most common questions after a crash test, visitors will come down and ask, did this person walk out of this car crash? And the truth of the matter is we won't actually know until we have downloaded all the injury data from the dummy, looked at video analysis to examine where the dummy has contacted on the inside of the vehicle, and then also another metric in our rating process is intrusion measurements, and so that will also take place after the crash.
On board the vehicle, we've got the data recorder, and that is hooked up to a wireless router inside the car that sends the data directly to the network at the Vehicle Research Center. Once it's on the network, all our engineers have access to it from their desks, and they can run all our standard routines for figuring out what the string of numbers coming out of the dummy actually means in terms of injury risk.
And once all of this is complete, then we write up a report about it, and that becomes the rating.
After all the data was gathered and analyzed, the 2013 Nissan Altima achieved a rating of acceptable for the small overlap test. This is the second highest rating the Institute presents. We've just seen what it takes to make you safer on the road. A team of dedicated and impartial experts, stringent and repeatable test conditions, and high-tech analysis. The result?
We all enjoy the work that we do because we know that in some small way we're making the world a better place. We can see the results of our work when we drive down the road.
You're doing something for people. You're saving lives. It's a wonderful feeling to work here.
And that's how it's done.